The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind of the Tathagata. Today is the second day of this 7-day session in June 2022 in northern New Mexico at Mountain Gate. And I'd like to share with you today something of Torei Enji's life and his specific teaching, the vow of the Bodhisattva. Torei Enji was 8 years old when he chose to become a monk in Japan. He was a contemporary of Hakuin. In fact, he was one of Hakuin's students and one of Hakuin's first Dharma successors. He came to Hakuin when he was, I think, 21, and he had already had a kensho by then. Another teacher recommended that he go to Hakuin, and so he did. Hakuin was at the least middle-aged at that point, and residing in his temple in what is the name of the town? I'll remember it in a minute, in Japan, and teaching. And Torei's really most important thing was to not only come to awakening, but to come to profound, deep awakening. Awakening after awakening after awakening. He was deeply drawn to practice. And that's probably how he ended up with his first kensho experience. And he went to train with Hakuin, and after just a few years, he felt he needed to go and do a solo retreat, an extended solo retreat. It happened to be in the winter, a lot of it, I think it was 100 days, and very, very, very damp and very, very cold, as it is in the winter in Japan, except in the southern island where they actually can grow citrus. But I think he was outside of Kyoto. And he really drove himself relentlessly. Ate very little. I'm not sure he had much access to food, actually, because he was in a little hut relatively away from people. And he sat day and night because he was driven to have deeper awareness. And at the end of that time, he was quite sick. Part of that came from the fact that he likely had a striving mentality, which is very much in the Japanese culture, and came to us actually it's down into Rochester and some of the other Japanese originated temples in America. Grit your teeth and fingernails digging into your palms. Those are actually words that Hakuin said, until he made himself so sick from that kind of striving that he had to learn a way to relax in his practice instead of gritting his teeth and sort of demanding that he do his practice. But that's another story. At any rate, it's also likely that Torei ended up with TB. Tuberculosis was rampant in Japan for many, many, many decades. And for good reason, because it's exceedingly cold and exceedingly damp in the winter in Japan, and because fuel is extremely expensive. Even in modern Japan, the most wealthy homes only have one room that has air conditioning and heating. One room, and they have a unit that they turn on when they go into that room, and that's usually when they have guests, and turn off when they leave. I used to sneer at the idea of heated toilet seats until I happened to live in Japan. And then, I have to say, if you've ever had the experience of having to go to a toilet in or outside of a house in Japan in the winter, you'll be very happy to meet ones that do have heated toilet seats. And for a long time, people had, every winter, whole families died of TV. And it was considered almost like a plague. In fact, there were many young Japanese women who were sent to Hawaii for marriage to Japanese workers there because they could not find a husband in Japan because they were marked with someone in the family having died of TB. There's a movie, I think it might be called Picture Bride, that came out some years back that described one of those situations. So how it was, the doctors gave up on him, as they actually had given up on Hakuin too, when he got himself so terribly stressed out. So Torei decided that if he was to die, he was to die. And so he would just spend whatever time he had left writing down what he understood about Zen practice. And that has come down to us to this day. A wonderful translation by a Japanese, a British, actually she was actually German, Irmgard Schlegel, became Yokyo Ni, the Dharma successor of I think it was Moritaga Soko Roshi. At any rate, that there is that translation, and that is the ideal one to get because it not only has Torei's translation or Torei's treatise on the inexhaustible lamp, it also has a 20th century Rinzai master's commentary on it, which makes it a lot more useful and inspiring as well, because you get a lot of background information on the things that Torei mentions. If you have a chance, go for it. That is one of the most important books that any serious Zen student should read. And it is available in a shorter form, just Torei's translation by one of the Cleary brothers through Amazon.com. But the other is, if you want a print edition, it's you have to write to Zen Center London, and on their website they will sell you a copy, and it's not terribly expensive. It comes to somewhere around $40, $45, $50 American. But there is also, somebody has pirated a copy, and there's a PDF now available on the website. That's a little bit of an awkward situation in that I assume there may be royalties paid to Zen Center London for their print copies, but obviously you can download the PDF for free. So there's a question about that. So Torei spent 6 months sleeping when he felt like he needed to sleep. In other words, when he was sleepy, he slept. Very Zen. And the rest of the time, when he was up to it, he wrote. And he wrote this very, very wonderful treatise on the inexhaustible lamp of Zen, which is our true nature. And he goes into the history of the practice and much, much more. thing is that he did survive. And he got a letter from Hakuin asking him to come and visit him. And so he did, just about the time he had finished writing his treatise. And he took it along with him and gave it to Hakuin and said, if you find any value in this, then do with it as you wish. If you do not, please destroy it. And obviously, Hakuin found that it was valuable, and so we can get a copy of it today. It is interesting that as he lay, for all he knew, dying, and TB is not a comfortable illness to die from. There is a contemporary young woman named Yaeko Iwasaki, who I believe Mitra-roshi encountered. He may have been the teacher to her father. Her father, when he hit 60 years old, which is considered a new beginning in Japan because it's when all the signs of your zodiac come around to the one that was there when you were born. And for whatever reason, he became quite frightened. And so he took up Zen practice. And after a year, he actually had a kensho. He must have been deeply motivated. And so she was motivated as well. And she ended up with TB. I think she already had TB by the time she started practicing. And eventually she died of it. But she practiced, and this is something that should inspire you, because if you've ever known anyone who had TB, they are exhausted, drained, weak, coughing all the time, and close to the end they cough up blood, so weak they can only lie in bed. There is a poem by a Japanese poet who had TB and died of TB, and it's said that when you cough up blood, you're close to death. And so he's lying in his bed, racked with coughing, and this great big glob of pus and blood goes shooting out of his mouth and hits the wall and slides down the wall. And he writes a poem and says, "Is this the Buddha?" It's a very deep level of understanding. Yaeko Iwasaki, the last 3 weeks of her life, had a deepening kensho experience every single one of those days. And what Mitra-roshi wrote about her dying was that he had never seen anyone die so peacefully. Simply letting go, because she understood. And what did she understand? This is something for us to really take a look at, because one day every single one of us is going to die. Hopefully we will live long and productive lives and die peacefully, but there are no guarantees to that. I know my own mother was talking with her sister 2 weeks before she died. Her sister came to visit, and they were talking about all the plans they were making for when their husbands died, because my father had Parkinson's already at that point, and it was assumed that he would go first. Well, 2 weeks later, she was gone, suddenly dropping dead of a massive heart attack. And people die in accidents. Some people, like my grandmother, my father's mother, ended up, all of her friends died before she did. And at 95, she finally let go in her sleep. Whatever it is, And I know most of you are quite young in terms of, hopefully, the length of life you'll live. But however long it is, it will only be that long. And it's worthwhile contemplating. It's something that people fear. Although Socrates, as he lay dying, as the poison was being creeping up his legs, and his students were sitting around him weeping, he said, "Why are you weeping? For all you know, this could be the greatest blessing in my life." And there's a book, I think it's called Death Poems of Zen Masters. Actually, it's not all Zen Masters. It's Japanese Death Poems, I believe is the title. And some of them are Zen Masters, but many of them are not. It's traditional in Japanese Zen to write a death poem. The one that Mitra-roshi wrote. Mitra-roshi, of course, was the teacher, the master of the Roshi that wrote the scrolls behind us, which he wrote specifically for Mountain Gate, Harada Shodo Roshi. Mitra-roshi, before he died, wrote, "As for liberating all sentient beings," which of course is one of the Bodhisattva vows, "just this left to do, letting go everything in the whole universe." As we sit here on our cushions or in our chairs in the Zendo, this is what we are doing, little by little, but significantly so, particularly in a 7-day sesshin, letting go all the places where we are caught. The sentient beings, of course, being our ideas, our conditioning, our self-image. And as we go deeper and deeper in our practice, we begin to see through that self-image. And when we see through it deeply enough, we end up with at least a certain level of kensho. And of course, that's only a beginning, because we need to continue on until all sentient beings are liberated. So back to Torei. He continued being Hakuin's student, and in fact became his Dharma successor very soon after that. He was 26 years old, I believe, when he was so sick. And it was not so long after that that Hakuin gave him transmission, asked him to take over a temple and bring it back to life. And that was Ryutakuji in Mishima, I think it is, Japan. And that temple still is viable today, centuries later, because Torei and Hakuin lived in the 1700s in Japan. And when I was one of my visits to Sogenji, I always used to take some time afterwards to go visit Hakuin's temple, because it was so amazing. Little temple, but such a powerful Zendo, even now. It's not a teaching temple at this point. That has long gone. But the amazing energy is still in that Zendo. And if you go there to visit, very likely you'll be allowed to sit in the Zendo for however long you want. And I also went to Ryutakuji. They were in sesshin at the time, so there was not much I could do except go to see Hakuin's. When he died, his ashes were divided among several places, one of which was Ryutakuji. But Torei only stayed there a year. He really didn't feel like he wanted to be a temple roshi. And so he left and went back to solo practice. And that was the rest of his life. Hakuin trying to lure him back to some temple or other, some position or other, and he acceding for a year or so and then disappearing again to continue his own practice. So the vow of the Bodhisattva, this is something that is attributed to him, and we chant it, as you know, every morning during sesshin, during the chanting service, and other times when we do chanting as well, because it is so important. Disciples, when I humbly observe the true nature of things, all are the marvelous manifestation of the Tathagata's truth. The Tathagata is another name for the Buddha, or in this case, really Buddha nature, the truth of Buddha nature. Atom by atom, instant by instant, all are none other than this mysterious radiance. And even, you have to put some kind of name on it if you're going to write something like this vow, but even to say radiance is too much. There are no words to describe Buddha nature, but it is something that is always with us, not even with us, it is us. We're never outside of it. Everyone, everything has the Buddha nature. So what is that? And why is it so important? Each of us who have come here have some sense that there is something beyond our ordinary perception that we need to return to. And it is experience of the true nature of life. And it is immensely freeing when you are able to do it. Of course, it takes a long time and a lot of work to get to that point. One might call it luminous transparency. The Tibetans have some wonderful ways of expressing it. It is, it's not something, but it has knowing. It has understanding. It has perception. But it's not a thing. And this is why when people have a deep enough awakening experience and we see through this mask that we masquerade in through life, then it is all of a sudden we're like these little birds on the edge of the nest being pushed out of the nest. We no longer have that nest to feel secure in. Not that it's secure, because it's not. This self-image. And we don't know what to do. We're not sure, since we don't have this sort of framework to live from. When we've seen through it, it's so false. There's no point in depending on it. Then how on earth are we going to know how to navigate life? This is one of the things that can come as a result of the process of having had a deep enough kensho. I remember the first 7-day sesshin I went to in Rochester. I just moved to Rochester from Turkey, having already commuted from Turkey for a workshop and then also a 4-day sesshin. I realized I needed actually to go and live there, to be in a temple where I would have to practice, and because I couldn't really do it that consistently on my own. It was very, very difficult. I had a lot of things that were interfering with that just within my own mind and my own history, and But I did go, and at the end of that 7-day sesshin, somebody had a Kensho experience, and I encountered that person, and he said, I have to learn how to walk all over again. Of course, he was walking, talking, adult, but it's like when your framework is gone because you've seen through the falsity of it, then what? And we can scramble to try to replace it with some other identity, which is something I hope we don't do, because it's sad. We're just going right back into the hole we came out of if we do that. But we have a chance to learn to fly. And there is, people don't understand this, but there is an innate sensibility within us that is liberated through Kensho, so that you don't have to have a map of how to behave. It naturally comes forth in accord with each circumstance that you encounter. And as you begin to trust that, you find how liberating it is, not having to be somebody, not having to have fixed ways of doing things, fixed identity. It is immensely liberating. And then all your innate wisdom can function freely, along with your innate compassion. This is something that people don't understand. And of course, because these days, most Kensho experiences are pretty shallow, so you don't necessarily get to that point. But if you do, you need some guidance, because it's important not to fall back into some other identity that's just going back into the fire, back into the suffering. So, because of this, atom by atom, instant by instant, all are none other than this mysterious radiance, because all is Buddha nature. Because of this, our virtuous ancestors extended loving care and reverence toward even such beings as birds and beasts. How then can we be but humbly grateful for the food, drink, and clothing that nourishes and protects us throughout the day, these being in essence the warm skin and flesh of the great masters, the incarnate compassion of the Buddha. If it is so even with inanimate objects, how much more should we be kind and merciful towards human beings, even those who are foolish? Though they become our sworn enemies, reviling and persecuting us, we should regard them as Bodhisattva's manifestations, who in their great compassion are employing skillful means to help emancipate us from the painful karma we have produced over countless kalpas through our biased, self-centered views. There's something that is becoming known in psychology circles, and that is that people draw to themselves certain kinds of experiences as a result of their attitudes, their outlooks, their assumptions, and their behavior that is a result of all those. And as we change for the more positive, and we begin to shed the attachments to negative thoughts, ideas, behaviors, and so on, we find our relationships with people and things changing for the positive. The sixth patriarch said, if others are in the wrong, I too am in the wrong. If I am in the wrong, I alone am in the wrong. This is a rather enlightened view. As we go more deeply into our practice, we can see through example, more of this. And one of those examples actually is when I shared yesterday the encounter between Harada Shotoroshi and the furious, enraged, homeless man at the temple that Harada was training at, Shofukuji in Kobe, Japan. And how Hadaroshi's simple openness, deep quiet, honoring of that man, not through anything he said, he didn't say a word actually, but through his caring attention to this man and his inner quiet. He wasn't engaging in any battle with this man, no arguments, no nothing. He just was hearing him, but from a deep and clear and open and let go place. And gradually the man settled down. There are other examples of that, and we will find them in our own lives. When we do the guided metta practice, or even doing metta loving kindness practice on our own, on a regular basis, we find our attitudes towards people and things changing in a more harmonious, more embracing way. And when I was doing that, along with living at the Rochester Zen Center, doing very, very intensive practice, I would find that when I would go out for a hike, for example, and there's a county park, I think it's called Menden Ponds, outside of Rochester. That's a lot of fields and some woods and a lake, well, presumably many lakes or several lakes. There's a lot of lakes up there in that area. It's glacial. And I would find that I'd be walking through the grass and little mice would not flee, nor would the snakes. I had to be very careful that I didn't step on these critters, whereas in the past they would have. And that also can transform into our human interactions as well. Took me a lot longer for that one. But this is what Torei Enji is pointing to. We have to have a backdrop of a practice that allows us to begin to let go of where we're caught in ideas and assumptions about ourselves and others. It's a tough one because we have an investment in not seeing those places because they're painful. I have said many times that if I had a dime for every time I winced when I saw some aspect of myself that was uncomfortable, I would be a billionaire at this point. But how wonderful to be able to open to these and to feel them in our bodies, because then we can begin to become free of the tyranny of them. As Bessel van der Kolk, the famous psychiatrist who's a trauma therapist and researcher, and managed to single-handedly get post-traumatic stress syndrome recognized by the Veterans Administration, has said in his book, "The body keeps the score." And as Peter Levine also has said something similar, that when we have a difficult experience, a painful experience, a frightening experience, we go shut down at some level, tense up, react. If we're small, we're too small to flee or to fight, and so we're just stuck there. and have to try to feel like we're okay at some level. But that energy that was set up, established, when we had that shock, stays stuck in our body if we cannot move through it. Peter Levine talks about wild animals who, when they come within a hair of being killed by another wild animal, but they escape, the deer is able to run longer than the cheetah can, even though the cheetah is also fast. And so they escape. And when that happens and it's clear that they're free of the danger, they shake. They shake for a bit, and that releases all the pent-up energy and tension that developed as a result of that shock of being chased and potentially devoured. But human beings, we just stay stuck. And particularly if we are in environments where that is a continuing experience for us, then it really stays stuck. And it can be mild, relatively mild. One would wish that we would all become enlightened parents. Unfortunately, despite everyone's best efforts, they're pretty rare. And most of us, if we're lucky, we had pretty enlightened parents. But if we're not, we didn't, and we suffered their best intentions to make us the best people they could figure out how to make. And often that was through criticism. I don't know why it's easier to tell somebody what's wrong with them than what's right with them. But since our brains have a negativity bias, we definitely remember the negative, the wrong, more than the right, the positive. And that gets embedded in our bodies. And this is one of the things that can come up during Zen practice. We don't want to feel that pain, whatever it's called. And so we try not to, but in order to become free, we have to feel it. And once you've been through this and felt it to the point where it released and let go, you'll realize what a gift it is to be able to do that. And you'll welcome negative body senses after that. Embarrassment, shame, regret, fear, terror, anxiety, whatever the name of it is. If you tune in and feel the energy of that with your body, in your body, until it dissolves, not until it goes away, because it will go away until you're able to really focus sufficiently on it to be with it until it dissolves. And then you're free of that in that instance. And Longchenpa, 10th century Tibetan master, highly regarded, taught that same thing centuries before modern psychologists got it. It's an important part of Zen practice that most people don't recognize, because very few of us have come to Zen practice out of 100% happy lives. If we have, that's pretty terrific. Then our question is, what is reality? And who are we really? And what will happen to us after we die? But if we've come with any kind of difficult or painful background, or even difficult or painful experiences in adulthood, they're going to be buried in our bodies, and they're going to come up during sitting And then is a wonderful opportunity to work with them in a way that you will become free of that energy. And your body can relax, and you won't have that background anxiety, fear, shame, whatever it is. If we awaken in ourselves this deep, pure faith, offering humble words and taking sincere refuge in our true nature, then with every thought there will bloom a lotus flower, each with a Buddha. Now, that is another way of saying what I've just said. As we become more liberated ourselves, a liberated thought has an energy that is positive, welcoming, compassionate, open, and that energy is felt among everyone around. And so metaphorically, you've got Buddha lands and Buddhas. But in actuality, it becomes a harmonious atmosphere for yourself and for everyone around. These Buddhas will establish pure lands everywhere and reveal the radiance of the Tathagata. May we extend this mind throughout the universe so that we and all sentient beings may equally bring to fruition the seeds of wisdom. And I would say wisdom and compassion, because they go hand in hand. And it's not just wisdom, it is wisdom and compassion. And we have it built in. All we need to do is uncover it. And it takes time. Our conditioning is such that we grow into society's assumptions of who we ought to be. But that's not necessarily who we are, and it's not necessarily optimal either for society or anyone else. Each of us is a wonderful individual with unique characteristics, and yet at the same time of the same Buddha nature. To open to that, to realize that, to live it, is an enormous gift in our life. It's the most valuable gift in anyone's life. And here we are, day 2 of Sesshin, on our way to realizing that. My only admonition is don't ever stop. I thank you for listening, and we will stop the teisho and recite the 4 vows.